The afternoon sun hung quietly over the open fields, warming the old tin walls of a small roadside shed. The air smelled of dry grass and distant farmland. It was the kind of peaceful afternoon that reminded many people of simpler days, days when neighbors knew each other by name, and kindness often arrived without being asked. Daniel Carter sat on the wooden step of the shed, wiping grease from his hands with a worn cloth. Life had not been easy for him lately. After his wife passed away 5 years earlier, Daniel had been raising his young son alone while working whatever small jobs he could find around town. But people who knew Daniel would say one thing about him. He never let hardship harden his heart. That afternoon, he had just finished repairing an old tractor for a nearby farmer when he noticed someone sitting against the metal wall of the shed. A young girl. At first, Daniel thought she might simply be resting. But as he walked closer, he noticed something troubling. Her head was wrapped in a loose bandage, and her face looked pale and exhausted. The girl looked no older than 12. Her breathing was shallow, and she seemed barely able to keep her eyes open. Daniel's heart tightened. He slowly knelt beside her so he wouldn't frighten her. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice calm and steady. "You all right, sweetheart?" The girl tried to answer, but her voice was little more than a whisper. "My head hurts." Daniel glanced carefully at the bandage. It looked like someone had wrapped it in a hurry, and a small spot of dried blood showed through the cloth. He didn't ask questions right away. Sometimes the first thing a person needs is simply someone who cares. Daniel stood up and walked inside the small shed. A moment later he returned with a clean cloth, a bowl of water, and a small first aid kit he always kept nearby. He sat beside the girl again, speaking softly the way a father does when a child is frightened. "Let's clean this up a little, okay? You'll feel better." The girl nodded faintly. As Daniel carefully removed the loose bandage, he could see the injury wasn't deep, but it had clearly been bleeding earlier. Perhaps she had fallen, or maybe been in some kind of accident. Daniel cleaned the wound slowly and gently, then wrapped it again with fresh gauze. All the while, the warm breeze moved quietly through the field. It reminded Daniel of the summer evenings from his childhood, when his own father used to sit on the porch fixing broken tools while the world seemed to slow down. When he finished, Daniel handed the girl a small bottle of water. "Take a sip," he said kindly. She drank slowly. For the first time, a bit of color returned to her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "You're welcome." For a few quiet moments, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled softly through the tall grass nearby. Then Daniel asked gently, "What's your name?" The girl hesitated for a moment. "Emily," she said softly. "Well, Emily," Daniel replied warmly, "I'm Daniel." She looked up at him with tired eyes. "You helped me." Daniel shrugged lightly. "Sometimes we all need a little help." He noticed something else then. Emily's clothes were expensive. Not flashy, but well made. And the small shoes on her feet looked far too new for a child wandering alone near farmland miles from town. But Daniel didn't question it. People carry their own stories. And kindness doesn't require knowing all the details. A few minutes later, the quiet afternoon was suddenly broken by the distant sound of engines. Daniel turned his head. Black vehicles were approaching quickly down the gravel road. 3 of them. They stopped near the field, and several men in dark suits stepped out. Their movements were careful, alert, the kind of alertness Daniel had only seen in movies. One of the men scanned the area before his eyes landed on the small shed. Then he saw Emily. The man immediately hurried forward, his face filled with concern. "Emily." The girl looked up weakly. The man slowed as he reached them, relief flooding his expression. "You're safe." Daniel stood quietly, unsure what was happening. Another man approached, speaking quietly into a small radio. Within moments, more people gathered around. But Emily raised her small hand gently. "It's okay," she said softly. "He helped me." The men looked at Daniel. Their serious expressions softened slightly. Then the first man turned toward the vehicles and called out to someone still inside. A tall older gentleman stepped out slowly. He wore a dark suit, but there was something deeper in his face, something heavy with worry. The moment he saw Emily, his eyes filled with emotion. "Emily," he said quietly. The girl smiled faintly. "Hi, Dad." The man hurried forward and knelt beside her, holding her carefully as if she were the most precious thing in the world. For a long moment, he simply held her. Then he turned toward Daniel. "Did you help my daughter?" Daniel nodded modestly. "She just needed her bandage cleaned up." The man looked down at the fresh gauze around Emily's head. His voice softened. "You may not realize this, but you may have saved her from something far worse." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone would do." The man slowly stood and extended his hand. "My name is Richard Langston." Daniel shook it. His grip was strong, but grateful. Richard studied Daniel's worn work clothes, the grease still on his hands, the simple wooden shed behind him. "Mr. Carter," he said calmly, "Emily wandered away from our estate after a riding accident this morning. Our entire security team has been searching for her for hours." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't found her." He didn't finish the sentence. But he didn't need to. Daniel glanced down at Emily. She was sitting more comfortably now, holding the water bottle. "Kids wander sometimes," Daniel said gently. "What matters is she's okay." Richard looked at him for a long moment. In Daniel's quiet humility, he saw something rare. Not wealth. Not status. Character. He slowly smiled. "Kindness like yours," Richard said softly, "is something the world doesn't see enough of anymore." Daniel chuckled lightly. "My dad used to say, if you see someone hurting, you help them. No questions first." Richard nodded slowly. "That sounds like a wise man." Emily suddenly tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad." Daniel was really nice. Richard looked down at her. "I can see that." Then he turned back toward Daniel. "I would like to repay your kindness." Daniel raised his hand politely. "That's not necessary." But Richard smiled. "Maybe not necessary, but it would mean a lot to me." Daniel thought for a moment. Then he simply said something that made several of the men glance at each other in quiet surprise. "Just make sure she rests today." Richard's smile grew wider. "That I promise." The vehicle soon prepared to leave. Before getting inside, Emily walked slowly back toward Daniel. She hugged him gently. "Thank you." Daniel patted her shoulder kindly. "You take care of yourself, Emily." As the vehicles drove away across the open road, the field slowly returned to its peaceful silence. Daniel sat back down on the wooden step. The sun had begun to drift lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the grass. He thought about something his father once told him many years ago. "Son, the smallest kindness can echo farther than you'll ever know." Daniel smiled quietly to himself. Because sometimes, a simple moment of care between two strangers can remind the world of something important. That compassion is still alive. And even in a busy, complicated world, a good heart can still change someone's day. Sometimes even someone's life. And on that quiet afternoon beside an old tin shed, kindness had quietly done exactly that.